thank you very much, everyone, for your interest in this important subject, and to everybody who's watching on Facebook. And this is actually a subject that is rated of high importance and of high concern and interest by the Australian community. So just to give you an example, these are some drugs from a patient I saw a couple of years ago who was unconscious, and he'd obviously planned a big night out. So that's some marijuana, that's some cocaine, that's an ecstasy capsule. This is methamphetamine, ice, and this one was a Viagra-like drug. So as I say, he was planning a big night out and was not intending to come to the emergency department. And this is from a thank you card that Jess, who you'll hear from later, got. It was a thank you card. And it sort of gives the impression that recreational drugs are a bit of a fun thing, bit of a laugh, bit of fun. And I'm sure it is actually for a lot of people, because I don't think anybody would deliberately choose to have a bad experience. But from the emergency department point of view, we only ever see the harms. I've never seen anybody come to the emergency department in my several decades career that said, I've come to the emergency department because I feel fantastic. All right, people only ever come to us because of the harms. And it's just worth reminding people that there is a spectrum of drug use, which you can see in this diagram. And we see people at every part of that spectrum, but obviously in that group, frequent and problematic use is a particularly prominent group. And this is a famous photo taken in our emergency department, actually won a photojournalism award. And you can see the intense focus of the team members, their eyes on the patient, trying to get them under control so that they can be sedated. And this is obviously an extreme example, but unfortunately it's pretty much a daily occurrence, and that's a really big deal. But everybody's intensely focused on the patients, and I always want to give a special shout out to our security staff, who are, in my opinion, the unsung heroes of dealing with these situations, because they allow us safe access to the patient. So let's start on some drugs. And look, I can't cover all the drugs there are. I'm just going to go through some of the main ones. And so the first one that everybody wants to know about is ice, or methamphetamine, and you can see why it's called ice, because it looks like crystals of ice. But depending on the way it's cooked, the way it's produced, it can look like other formulations as well. And ice can be injected, it can be eaten, it can be snorted, it can be inhaled, and it has really profound effects on the body. And I'm not going to go into the clinical effects because I haven't got time today. So I'm just giving you an overview of the drugs and how much they cost. So, for example, when you walk out of this building and you look along the streets, every now and then you'll see one of these plastic snap lock bags, the little ones. And that's how the drugs are dealt in. They're dealt in points. So 1 point is 1/10 of a gram, all right? And that's from one of our patients. That's basically a point of meth, 1/10 of a gram. And look, for most of the last few years, the cost for 1 point is about $100. But the price varies according to availability. So when it's very available, the price goes down. And I'm told that pre-COVID, the price had dropped down to as low as $30 to $40 a point, which is really, really cheap. It has gone back up now in COVID to about $100, $150 a point, because the supply is obviously a bit harder now. And just a reminder that methamphetamine affects every organ system in the body in very adverse ways. Probably a lot of people have watched the show Breaking Bad. I put this up because in 2007 I went to a talk given by a police officer on how to make meth. And I came away with two main messages. The first one was, that's pretty easy. I reckon I could do that. And the second one was that for a $30 investment in materials, you could get a $500 return. So you can see why there's a financial driver and why serious and organised crime gets involved in this, because the financial returns are so massive. So about 10 years ago, we did a MRI brain study on patients who came into the emergency department having used meth. And I haven't got time to go into the details, but our theory was, do the patients have lesions in their brain that neither they nor the doctors looking after them suspect? And we found that 20% of them had an unsuspected lesion, which was really surprising. And you can see the arrow there. It doesn't look very impressive, that little white dot there. But that little white dot is actually an area of scarring of brain tissue due to the death of brain cells. And this particular person, who's a youngish person, had several of these in his brain. Same again, there's no arrow on this one because this is pretty big and easy to see. Again, an area of scarring of the brain from the death of brain cells in a young person. Now, many of you would have seen something like this, sort of a public health message like this, which is saying that using meth ages you on the outside quite rapidly. But our research, which aligns with other research, is not only are you aging on the outside, you're also aging on the inside. So it's quite natural to, when you're older, of my age, to have those lesions because of age, but young people shouldn't have those lesions. All right, ecstasy. What does ecstasy look like? I'll show you some pictures in a moment, but last year for Christmas I was given this really good book, Fentanyl Inc., by journalist Ben Westhoff, who wrote all about the drug trade. And interestingly, I was reading this book and I learnt about Wuhan. Wuhan is a centre of excellence in China for producing illegal drugs. And then the next week I hear about Wuhan from the pandemic. It was one of those spooky coincidences. So ecstasy was really big in the late 90s and the 2000s, and the chemical is MDMA. And to make it, you need a substance called saffrole. And that is obtained from harvesting the sassafras tree. And there's some pictures of sassafras trees and the leaves. Now, in some Southeast Asian countries, it set off a scramble to harvest those trees. And in Cambodia, there's a very rare type of sassafras tree that produces a huge output of sassafras oil. So to harvest the trees, they have to be chopped down and boiled in these giant vats for a week. And you get about $200 a gallon. And some of those, and for $200 a gallon, 1 gallon makes 1,000 tablets of ecstasy. And some of the law enforcement seizures were seizing 50 tonnes of sassafras oil. So you can see why ecstasy, like there was just millions and millions of tablets of ecstasy circulating around the world. Unfortunately, it causes massive environmental damage to harvest these trees and kills wildlife. And there was a risk of these trees becoming extinct. So some of those countries introduced very heavy restrictions on harvesting of these trees. So that, together with the massive law enforcement seizures, led to a really big drop in the availability of ecstasy and led to producers using lots of adulterated substances. And that's probably the reason, or a major contributing factor to the spike in music festival deaths when people think they're taking ecstasy. Really interesting. There's thousands and thousands of different types of ecstasy, but this is just one picture of them. Typically, it's embossed with some kind of icon. So you can see this one here, that's the Toyota icon. Oh, what a feeling, for example. For a while there was a particular type of ecstasy, the blue dolphin, that was very popular because everybody loves dolphins. or it's the power of marketing and language. Everybody loves dolphins, and dolphins are these beautiful creatures, so the blue dolphin ecstasy pill must be a particularly beautiful experience, but it's just marketing. Ecstasy pills, look, it all depends on availability, but you're probably going to pay $25 to $50 for an ecstasy pill. And being a stimulant, it really dilates the pupils. And but I always tell people that there are other causes of dilated pupils. So my family tell me that whenever I get a big bill, my pupils go like that. So there are other causes of big pupils besides ecstasy. And so this MRI brain study we did, this was a young woman who came to us about 12 hours after taking an ecstasy and had a seizure. And you can see that this part of the brain here is sort of white and bright and swollen compared with the corresponding part on the other side. This is the hippocampus part of the brain. The hippocampus is very important for memory and learning, and not surprisingly, this person later reported problems with her short-term memory. And the repeat scan at 3 months' time, you'll have to trust me on this, it shows that it's smaller, it's shrunken a bit. And basically, the bigger your hippocampus, the better in terms of your memory and learning. All right, more drugs. Heroin. Heroin is also dealt in points. So remember, 1 point is 1/10 of a gram. And the most typical price for heroin in Perth is about $100 for a point of heroin. And being a depressant drug, it actually constricts the pupil, and that's one of the signs we look out for. Marijuana is the most commonly used illicit drug in Australia, and you can buy an ounce for about $350, or you can get a small starter pack which will give you a few joints for about $25. Again, researchers seem to find that there are structural brain changes associated with the use of marijuana, more specifically the amygdala part of the brain, which is to do with the emotional regulation. For a while there, we were seeing lots of synthetic cannabis. A popular one was chronic. You can see that's a 3-gram tin of chronic, which would cost the best part of $100. And we hated the synthetic cannabinoids because they caused us lots and lots of clinical problems, actually much more severe than regular marijuana. Cocaine. Users regularly tell me that the cocaine in Perth is terrible and it's really expensive. So in the UK, if you're going to have a good night out and you wanted to buy some cocaine, it would cost you about £50 and you'd have a good night out. For a similar quantity in Perth, possibly of lower quality, you'd be paying hundreds of dollars, $400 to $600, which is quite a lot of money. But in more recent times, the price of cocaine in Perth does seem to be heading downwards, and which then increases use. And I can say from my experience that in the last few years, I've started seeing more cocaine-related problems than I ever have before. All right, LSD. So LSD is typically sold in these little tabs, almost like smaller than a stamp-sized tab on blotting paper that you put under your tongue. And they're typically beautifully artistic pieces of work. My favourite one is Donald Duck, because I was always a big Bugs Bunny fan when I was a kid. There's another one here of Albert Hofmann, who was the inventor of this, and who used LSD, and remarkably, I learnt recently, lived to be 104 years old. So these little tabs of LSD cost, and again, it varies according to availability, but you might pay $25 to $30 for one of these tabs. And finally, this is the last illicit drug that I'm going to go over, is GHB. often known as liquid fantasy. This is a drug that people take because it's stimulating and causes a bit of a high, a bit of a euphoria, and is said to be an aphrodisiac as well, hence its popularity. The dosing window is like really narrow, so it's really easy to get the dose wrong. And when you get the dose wrong, basically you end up in a coma and have all sorts of problems. A 30 ml container of GHB might only cost you $30. It's pretty cheap, but you can never trust the dosing. One of the things that we've noticed is since COVID started, there's been a big spike in people we're seeing with GHB overdose. And the last drug that I'm going to mention is a legal drug. Nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, is often sold in these little cylinders. The nangs is what they're called, to help you whip your cream. And there's 24-hour services to have boxes of 100 of these nangs delivered to your door for that, for that 2 a.m. cake emergency. In fact, one of the sites I think is 24-hour cake emergency, Uber Nang, Nangaroos, and it costs about $1 each, even cheaper. But the thing is that we're finding is, although it's popular with young people because it gives them a bit of a high, some people are using literally hundreds of these per day. Hundreds per day. And unfortunately, it has a very serious harmful effect in that it causes degeneration of the spinal cord. So you've got these young people, and we're seeing them now, who've got degeneration of their spinal cord and can't walk properly or have abnormal sensation. And it can be permanent, it can be irreversible. Luckily for some people it's reversible with treatment, but there's no guarantees. So that's a very quick tour of some of the recreational drugs around town. I always tell people that working in the emergency department is a bit of a window on the world, and we'll see what else we see today. But just another figure for you, 7% of all the patients that we see in the emergency department at Royal Perth Hospital are related to illicit drug presentations. Thank you.